So as a business owner, do you often feel isolated or stuck? Maybe you're facing adversity and it's like, dude, how in the world am I going to get through this?
When I first got started with my business journey and my entrepreneurship journey, I did not get a lot of, go for it, you're doing the right thing. I got a lot of the opposite. You're not ready for that. You shouldn't be doing this or wait till this time. I did those things not because I wanted accolades. I did those things not because I wanted to be on podcasts talking about them. I did them because they were who I am.
Let me tell you, I'm excited about today's conversation. I have a special guest with us on the show. And you know me, I don't bring a lot of guests on the show, but when I hear a story of somebody who I think can rock it out, I got to hear the story and I got to just dive into it. I want to share it with you. So today's guest, Mr. Gresham Harkless. How are you doing, brother?
I am doing awesome, Justin. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Man, I can't wait to unpack your story. The very story you were sharing with me already is powerful. And before we dive into the story, who is Gresh?
Yeah, I am very much so a busybody. That's the word I like to use the most. I'm somebody that likes to be involved in a lot of different things. I have a digital marketing company called Blue 16. Been in business for 10, 11 years now, really helping people to essentially be found online. I would say part of my coming of age story is I started a family newspaper when I was 10 years old. So I call it my first quote unquote media company. My dad was in the military. We didn't have all these snazzy tools to instantly connect like we do today. So I got out Microsoft Word, put some clip art in, so used to cover all the stories that were happening in my family. And we would deliver those newspapers within a care package to my dad, who was all the way across the world serving the country and the world. I always say that philosophy is part of who I am. So within Blue 16 Media, I'm really big on helping people and promoting people to create media companies, which are essentially ways that you can connect with your ideal target clients and customers to basically serve them. So my media company, CB Nation, we do lots of content around entrepreneurship and business, the people we love and want to serve with. And we're also doing a lot more content around franchising, which is just another way to kind of get into business. So that's a little bit about me and my, just a taste of my coming of age story.
Man, that's amazing. And in the media world, especially, it's digital media. It's cutthroat. The competition out there is crazy. As a producer, as somebody who writes books and, produces podcasts and videos and all the time speaking, I get inundated with people trying to sell me their services. And it's hard to know somebody who, whether or not they're fly by night or like you, who's been in business over a decade, you've proven your systems, you've proven your structure. What about resilience? I want to use that term for today, the word resilience. What about resilience allows you in such a cutthroat industry to stand out and while still adding impact to the people that you have the honor and privilege to serve?
Yeah, it's so funny, you use the phrase fly by night, and I think that's one of the things that happens a lot. And funny enough, I usually say some of my best clients, people we love to work with, are people that I say know enough to be dangerous and sometimes have had experience with those fly by night people. Those could be people that, have said that they wanted to hang out their shingle and did, digital marketing business for about 6 months. Those are the people that said that they know how to do it and didn't know how to do it. But I think a lot of longevity comes from being able to kind of execute at a higher level than most. And I think that's, what ends up, standing the test of time. But I think resilience is one of those things where, I always say that if you know kind of the journey you're on, the quote unquote fight that you're in, it helps set you up a lot more. And around entrepreneurship and business, you can't really sometimes go a day without things not going the way you want them to go. So I think when you understand that not only is it not just you that's going through those struggles, but that it is actually part of the journey and it's frankly necessary for the journey, then you kind of get a little bit more peace. But it doesn't always feel good when you're going through it. And I think that's one of the things that you start to realize, that not only does it make you better, it also maybe ends up being a superpower for you if you're able to kind of get back up, dust yourself off, and continue on, so to speak.
So if we go back in time with that attitude that I'm hearing, that tenacity that we business owners often have, we go back in time and you started a newspaper, as I'm going to call it. I love that story, by the way. You started a newspaper. You're trying to encourage your dad, your pops, who's probably on the other side of the world, I'm assuming. He's serving in the military. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was serving for a year in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So he was there for a year when I was 10.
So you're trying to encourage your pops and hey, Dad, we got this. What led from that entry level beginning of, hey, I'm going to now, I had this entrepreneur journey, into where you're at today, what was the next step in your journey, man?
So, I mean, I think I've always been like that busybody. So I've had those entrepreneurial tendencies. So I've always was trying out different things. I think for me, at that age, I was 10 years old, at that time. So it was pretty much the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want to do. But, there's a lot of little small steps. I think you start to discover who you are. You get to try out a lot of things. I think the really great thing for me is that and the environment I was in, I was able to kind of try out so many different things. So whether it was building a computer to, working part-time, when I was 16. So I did all of those things and tried out so much. But I really believe probably the next, big thing was probably like going to college, trying to figure out what I wanted to be. And that's where I started to realize like, I don't really know like who I am. And I think through those 4 years or so, you start to explore different things. You start to get a better idea of who you are. And frankly, like, I tell that story because a lot of that was my North Star. I don't know that I knew who I was until I looked back and said, who was I before I was trying to know who I was, if that even makes sense. And when you start to explore who you are, like as a kid, I always feel like there's clues as far as like the essence of who a person is. So it's probably during those times where I said, hey, I really love this content creation. And that's what we call it now. But for me, it was just like, I like writing. I like creating, and now we call it content creation. But for me, it was just literally like a kid that just loved to write, loved to, play with computers and do different things. And things kind of just took off from there.
So if I look back in my mind's eye over the last 10, 11 years, so you've been in business now 11 years, running Blue 16 Media as this digital marketing firm, and things have changed a little bit. Things have changed a lot, especially in your world. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we didn't have AI or chat GTP or everybody trying to go to college on this software. So, as you've been, a decade, by the way, friends, those of you who don't understand the business world, a decade in the digital marketing space is phenomenal. That is, that's why whenever I saw that story, I was like, yes, I want to have Gresh on the show to talk through this. So as you begin this journey, and we're not dealing with the same things we are today in terms of technology. Technology is now, in its infancy. Hard to believe it is, but it's in its infancy. Podcasts were probably just coming onto the show at that point. Blogs are probably the primary driver way back in the day. Social media was there, but we were just barely playing with it. What were the hardest challenges in the infancy of your business to say, yes, I had this passion, as I heard from you, to create content, but now I'm looking at this blue ocean, as you called it, this thing in front of me saying, where do I go? What was the challenge that you were facing in the infancy of this business, in this world that you live in?
Yeah, what's so funny, when I first started, like going back to that story of being, I call it like a journalist, I've always looked at and thought I was going to do something related to journalism because I love to write. But I started to marry those things together when I first started Blue 60 Media. So the actual first challenge was I started doing blogging. I eventually, years later, had the podcast and things like that. Always loved journalism. I've always loved stories. I've always loved like that engagement. So the first kind of challenge I had wasn't really as directly related to digital marketing itself. It was actually related to more journalism and content creation. And it was like and while I'm literally watching, and I graduated in 2008, 2009, that in and of itself is the definition of resilience because the world was completely different and falling apart. So, but when I looked at newspapers, it's like, okay, this business model that they're using is not what people are doing. People are not advertising to the level that you can just completely, have a Washington Post or USA Today or whatever your flavor might be. At the end of the day, you have to figure out a way to kind of build a better business. So that's where a lot of the digital marketing came about. I didn't know it was of any value, to be very honest with you, Justin. I talked to other business owners and they said, hey, you know how to do this. And I was like, okay, I do, but you would actually pay for this? And that's where a lot of that came about. It's like, okay, people that are really interested in content, I'm connecting with them, and then they don't know how to build a website. They don't know how to update their website. They don't know about SEO. All those things came about because I was already spending time talking to them, and then those opportunities came about. So I think that was the very first thing, is like being able to understand that this could be a way to kind of support, I guess would be the right word, the content creation journey that people can be on.
That's interesting. I'm fascinated with the journey and the fact that you didn't launch out in the direction that you are currently pursuing. I think that's a story that so many business owners have. I mean, if you took me back, I've been a business owner now 30 years. My first business was cutting grass, man. It was like, if I dreamed 30 years from now that I'd already sold 7 businesses and now I'm coaching business owners on how to rapidly scale their companies, I'd have told you smoking crack. Many business owners, we start off and then we find out that the path we're on ends up being either by accident discovered to where our calling is or by choice. And it sounds to me from your story that where you're at today and where you begin are two different things. So as you're growing the company, I know you're facing things like, cash reserve issues, revenue issues, trying to figure out who your avatar is, trying to figure out, when do you hire somebody, when do you fire somebody, all of these various things, but you're in a rapidly transforming business. I mean, the digital market space, it has changed 100,000 times, it seems like, in the last 10 years. So, as with each of these changes, did you find yourself having to reinvent yourself, to having to say, hey, now my business, my avatar that I'm pursuing was this, but now they're, talk to me through that journey because I didn't experience that personally. That was not my journey. Mine was a little bit more boring than yours has been. So, how did you navigate all these various changes through technology?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. It's so funny. I was actually thinking, and I was talking with somebody the other day, and I was saying that, when I first started, I would stand up and say, "Hey, I do digital marketing," and I would be able to do all the things that there were with to digital marketing, whether it be Facebook, you schedule posts, you do SEO, you do build a website. It was all like very inclusive. But now there's so many different niches within just at social media, for example. You can be a Twitter or X, expert. You could be a LinkedIn expert. Another person can do SEO. Another person can do Google Ads. So that's probably been the biggest thing. Again, we're still in the infancy, but there's definitely been a huge maturation in the way that people are consuming content. Because I think that's what it is at the heart of it. It's really kind of looking at the maturation of these digital platforms because of how people are taking in content and information. So if you really look at like TikTok as a way that younger demographics are actually taking in content, you realize that as a business owner, or as an entrepreneur, you want to be there. So for me, it's actually been really difficult and challenging to understand like where you want to kind of hang your shingle because I think that of course there are agencies that do 360-degree, or at least they say that they do, but I think most of the time you're going to really lean into this is the core of what you do. The reason that a lot of people might say that 360-degree, they do all aspects of digital marketing is because the average client or customer may not necessarily know exactly what they want to do. And what I mean by that is that you hear that TikTok is a new flavor of the month. You want to know, hey, who does TikTok ads? But do you really want somebody to do TikTok ads, or do you want somebody to drive clients and customers and be where your ultimately your clients and customers are? So it's been a lot more of like understanding each of the aspects, but really kind of leaning into what is your core like service offering, but also like partnering with different people. But yeah, I mean, it's been a huge change, and it's constantly changing and constantly going. So that's one of the things that we try to do is to kind of be able to speak to each of the different languages, but maybe not necessarily be mastery of all the languages. But I would also say that we've also tried to invest a lot more into our own properties, which is where a lot of that media company and media mindset that I talk about comes about. Where it's also like, how do you employ or take your own medicine so that you can build platforms and brands that can serve the audience that you want to serve too? So that's a little bit about like how it's changed, but that's like an oversimplification because it's not been linear, it's not been straight. It's definitely been a rocky road for sure.
That is definitely an oversimplification because I've tried to follow this journey, as many business owners have. One of the things I'm interested to know is, as a business owner myself, and I coach hundreds of business owners on a monthly basis. For us, marketing is mystical. It's one of these things that we don't quite understand, and I don't think I'm in a minority on there. And I think that in my own journey, I've done things that many business owners would aspire to do with writing the books. I mean, one of my books was #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, and just writing books out and being on podcasts and being on stages and talk about it to me is a style of marketing. But many business owners, their Achilles heel for their business is marketing, and they don't understand it. So, but you're in the marketing business. You're dealing with specifically with digital marketing, which is micro niched in there. In your own business, what has been your Achilles heel? I mean, I would have to assume that marketing, so you got it down, and there's something else. Or do you fall within the old saying, the cobbler's kid's shoes are never shod? In other words, that marketing is your Achilles heel and you're the expert in marketing. What's your struggle in your business as a marketing expert?
I think there's always like a level to what you want to do related to marketing. So like marketing might be better than most, but I always want it to be more. So like I'm just that person. So it's never at the level, and no, probably will never be at the level that I want it to be. So it is that. But if I were to pinpoint probably one thing, it's probably making sure that you're hiring and bringing on the right people. That's something that has been a challenge. But I think the biggest part of that that's been beneficial for the type of business that I have is that we're not building houses over here, literally building houses. So if somebody doesn't hammer in the right place, everything's not going to fall down. So I think a lot of what we try to do is to minimize the risk, have internal projects that new hires work on. But again, that's time lost. When you bring on people and it doesn't work out, you train them. Doesn't matter how much SOPs and things that you have in place, it ends up taking a lot out of you. So I would say if there was one thing that probably we can get a lot stronger with, it's what a lot of businesses probably struggle with: finding and retaining that talent, being able to coach them up so that you can be able to kind of scale and grow. Because I think ideally, when you start a business, you don't want it to be like it is in the E-Myth, where you are literally doing all the things and you never ever get to leave from doing all the things because everything is so dependent upon you. So I think that's one of the biggest things that has, been an Achilles heel, so to speak, in the business.
I didn't know you were going to answer that way. What's interesting is I just got off a coaching call with one of my one-on-one clients, and we actually walked through my process on how to hire a best-in-class team so they can drive value. And friends, you know me well enough to know that I'm gonna say something here, and that is, in this next upcoming month on Value Growth Academy, I'm actually answering that question. Gresh, that is the number one question I received the last 30 days through social media is, Justin, how in the world do I hire the right people? And then people delineate that in a couple different ways. How do I hire the people who care about my business? How do I hire the people who I can entrust with my company, my name, my baby? How do I hire the people who are going to stick with me through an exit? I've heard this question 1,000 different ways, it seems like, in the last month. So in the Value Growth Academy, friends, if you're not a member of the Value Growth Academy, check it out. Go to valuegrowth.com and you can see it there. Go to justgoodbread.com, you can see it there as well. But we're going to be answering this particular process in the upcoming class. So I'm interested that you said that. That's now probably the 1,001 time I've heard that particular pain point. And I think it's interesting, Gresh, maybe it's the current economic environment we're in that's causing turnover. We just went through this revenue spike, where at the same time we saw because of COVID, wages spike up. There are dentists. I just had this in my head. There are dentists right now who are facing this, where before COVID, you could hire a hygienist at $16, $17, $18 an hour. Now they're having to pay them $35, $40 an hour. Less than 3 years later, that's double the type of outlay, but yet the prices of the services have not increased by that much. And so business owners are struggling trying to figure out how to hire. So it's interesting you say that. So outside of that particular struggle, as you look at your long-term vision, I know you have aspirations, man. I can't wait to hear them, but you've got aspirations. You're now 11 years, which is an eternity in the digital marketing space. You're 11 years in business. You've weathered some hard storms. You deal with the same pain points. Thank God that we're not different. You deal with the same pain points that all of us business owners are dealing with. But as you're facing this word resiliency is still in my mind, that you're looking at these troubles and you're saying, yes, they're here, but in fact, you told me, off the air, hey, I'm a big man of faith. Me too. I believe that God has ordained us for something only that we can do. I believe He's preparing us for what He's prepared us for. I believe that with all my heart. So as you look at these hard times you've gone through, these trying times, that you have this vision, that you can see it, you can taste it. Man, I want to hear it. I want to hear that vision. I want to hear that passion come out that I know as a business owner you have. Where will you be in 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're building media brands, and the really big goal is to be able to kind of help to serve people in many different ways. So CB Nation is definitely a way that we're hoping to help serve the entrepreneurship business, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business owners that are able to understand, and I like to call them the superheroes in their world, but don't necessarily have that opportunity to be able to have their story to be told, to be able to talk about the things that they've learned. So what I'm really hoping to do is to build a community definitely around that B2B space, so that people can really understand not just the stories, but also understand exactly how to, be a better business owner, to grow a business, to be able to scale a lot of the awesome things that you're doing. And I think we want to kind of replicate that in many different industries. But I think that's a really big focus of how can we create a bigger picture around entrepreneurship and business. And frankly, like I often say, if you run your own race, you can't lose. And the reason I say that is because as you start to hear people's stories, as you start to hear how people have reached success, you realize that it is not always exactly what another person does that you need to replicate. It's something that you can do in your own way. You just have to truly understand what that is for you. So I think that's a lot of what we're doing in the next, 5 years, is being able to kind of do that within that industry, but also hopefully replicate that in many different industries. As far as like what they are, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm always testing out things. But I think really being able to kind of be the media of choice for that B2B place and be able to create partnerships with different brands and different organizations to co-create content and information is really where I want to hang my hat on.
So for a vision that large that you just shared, I have to believe there was a trying time in your recent past, maybe the last 11 years in business, maybe before then, that increased your faith. That you're like, hey, if I've got this vision, if I can see where I want to be, then there was this time in the past where a hard time came in. I saw victory through this hard time, whatever reason. And I know if I was able to get through that, I can reach this. I want to take us back to that hard time. And I'll ask you my last question, but I want to take us back to that hard time. What gives you the confidence, the tenacity, and that passion you just shared to say, I know I'm going here because of this? What was this in your past?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it. Like, I'm definitely a man of faith. So when I first got started with my business journey and my entrepreneurship journey, I did not get a lot of, go for it, you're doing the right thing. I got a lot of the opposite. I got a lot of, you're not ready for that. You shouldn't be doing this, or wait till this time. And frankly, like, a lot of those words came from people that were really close to me, people I loved and cared about. And now, I've gotten older. I'm further along in that journey. I understand that sometimes people love you and they say those things to you to protect you from falling, hitting your knee and scrubbing your knee and things like that. But I think a lot of what I've learned and understood now is that we all have things that we might be scared of. We all have things that might hold us back. And sometimes we can project that on other people. So for me, like, it was my faith that kind of led me on this path, because like I mentioned this story, when I was 10 years old, I can tell you I was the kid on the playground when I was younger, selling potato chips, doing those things like that. I had those entrepreneurial tendencies, and it wasn't anybody telling me you need to do this. So I felt like I was literally given these gifts to be able to do that. I'm a big believer in the parable of the talents. I believe we have talents and gifts for a very specific reason. And I felt like not only should I, but it was my duty to take these talents and gifts and do something with it. As far as I got, I don't know what that was going to look like, but I was going to do the work. So when I first got started, with my business, I had a lot of those instances happen where people were telling me, no, I shouldn't do it. But frankly, I said, I'm gonna take a bold decision. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go for it. And when I went for it, I literally tore my Achilles about 45 days after that. So mind you, my insurance had, expired. I'd left a job that I was at. I was going to do freelance writing and do all these different things. I had everything all set up, and it did not go the way that I wanted it to go. And I was pretty miserable, honestly. I mean, you're talking about 6 months. I didn't tear my Achilles completely, but I tore it enough to where it like really would mess with my head and mentally and emotionally. Like, you doing something bold, you having this dream, aspiration, and goal, and you going for it, and it doesn't go the way that you wanted to go. And that's just at the start. So I've had like many different, micro things that have happened from there. But I would say that was probably the biggest hurdle and point of resilience that I had to have. But for whatever reason, I'm very hard-headed. And I think everything worked out as it should, because at that time, I was really focused on being a freelance writer. I was going to go do all this freelance writing. Had I not tore my Achilles tendon, I would have probably never worked on what eventually became the blog, what eventually became Blue 16 Media. All those things happened. Now, did it hurt? Absolutely. But I think when you go through that and you start to look back, you start to realize that maybe because I'm so hard-headed, I always say God had to tear out my Achilles, because if that hadn't happened, I would have been running around not doing those things. So, it's sometimes when you're going through those frustrations and those things aren't happening the way you wanted to go, we can think that it's bad, but maybe it's working out for you. Things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And that definitely happened for me. As hard as it was, is something that it kind of put me in the right place. But it took a while for me to get there to say that this happened for me. That's for sure.
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Sorry you went through that time period, but I've also learned that business owners, especially entrepreneurs, those of us who are founders, we go through a hard time, and we often rest on that victory or that true survival, whatever you want to call it there, to lean into our passion, our vision that we have in front of us. So Part of my mission is to inspire, encourage, and to educate. And I think you've inspired, encouraged, and educated us today. But I have this question that I never prepared the guest for, so please forgive me in advance. But I have this question that whenever a guest comes on, that I'm deeply interested in hearing from you. I typically ask this question toward the end, and we'll talk about how people can get to know you a little bit more. But my question is this, and I'll ask the question, give you some time to process it and think about it a little bit, and then I'll explain why it's a big question to me. So my question is if today was your last day on earth, I mean, you're going to meet Jesus tomorrow, right? Today's your last day on earth, and around you are your closest family members and your friends. Maybe if you have children, maybe they're around you, but those people are around you. What is that one piece of advice that you would give them? That's my question. Now, here's why that question is so important to me. Because I believe that God has prepared us for what He's prepared us for. I believe that He's created you and me to uniquely do what only we can do. I loved how you said, if I run my race, because that's the statement I said. If I'm chasing you, man, there's never a finish for me, right? So if I run my race, then all I got to do is is that whenever I'm on my deathbed or the day I meet Jesus, I did the very best. I left it on the field, like in the old coaching days, right? Leave it on the field, son. I remember my coach telling me that. So I have this thing that the cemetery doesn't bother me in the sense somebody died, is that they have wisdom and they have experiences and they have things that they can share with others. And I want to capture that from everybody I meet. So that being said, my question is today's your last day on earth. You're surrounded by the people that you love the deepest and they know you. What is that one piece of advice you would give them?
I think knowing your God-given why is probably what I would lean on the most. And the reason that I really lean on that is because I think that ends up being the fuel. We might say that I've been resilient in my life, but I would just say I'm fueled by what I feel like I was called for, what my purpose is. And I think if you can tap into that, sometimes that's the only fuel that you'll have. Like, you don't have the energy, you're tired, you're exhausted. Things aren't going the way that you want them to go. And I've had those experiences. I've been laid off once, was going to get laid off again, as I went through this journey. So those things happen. But I think if you can really say to yourself that, hey, I have this relationship with God, I lean on that, and I really believe that this is what I'm supposed to do because I feel like it was given to me, then that ends up being the thing that can kind of, keep you going. So that's what I would say is, like, tap into that why, that God-given why. And I think that, it won't always be perfect. Frankly, if it is perfect, then it may not necessarily be the right path because that's part of the journey. But once you know that, then I think that's the thing I would leave those I loved and cared with.
Well, I have to follow up with a question on there. So let's say I don't know what my God-given why is. How would you recommend, or what advice could you give me as saying, hey, how do I discover this? We have business owners of every nationality, every size, every location. I mean, literally have tens of thousands of business owners listen to the show. And I get to hear people who are running 9-figure companies and they're like, dude, I don't know what I'm here for. So, you open that can, so I'm going to walk into it a little bit more, you crack the door, so to speak. So what advice would you give to somebody who says, Gresh, I hear you, but how do I know? How do I find God-given why for my life?
I am, no expert on this. I can only tell you from my experience. Like I mentioned, when I went in college, I was undecided. I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. I think there's definitely place for experimenting and just trying out different things and seeing what might work for you. But frankly, for people, and I imagine a lot of people that listen to this are probably your type A people that are driven to do lots of things and accomplish things and check off that bucket list. Sometimes we have to create that space, for that to happen. I think if we look backwards at, our childhood, I believe personally, and for me, there's seeds planted of like who I am as an individual. I did those things not because I wanted accolades. I did those things not because I wanted to be on podcasts talking about them. I did them because they were who I am. And I think not necessarily that it will give you the exact steps that you should take on who you are, but I think it will give you a little bit more of the direction of where you should go, of like what lights you up. And I think if we can tap into that and continue to kind of do that and check that temperature, so to speak, I think that'll give you a little bit more direction. But it's so phrased that, you hear a lot of times when people, start businesses, I would do this for free. What's the thing you would potentially do for free? What's the thing that lights you up? What's the thing you get excited about? And maybe it isn't something that's profitable, but maybe you can really think about it. You can create a new avenue. You can trailblaze and do it in such a way where you combine that non-figure business with this passion that you have. You're able to do it in such a way that nobody else is doing it. And you create that blue ocean. And that's really the way that, you know, that creativity, that innovation starts to happen. It's not when you do something that's unique. I think it's when you start to marry those things together into something unique. So that's what I would say is like, how can you, you know, take those passions and gifts and mold them and create them to a recipe that is your own quote unquote secret sauce so that you can do what you do on a level that nobody else can.
Man, I love that answer. I think out of all the questions that I've asked today, that answer spoke to me. So thank you for sharing that. I genuinely mean that. Man, I like the way you summarize that. Friends, I'm going to have to go back and play that again and again on repeat just to hear that answer again and again and ponder that and meditate on that, because so many of us as A drivers, as business owners, we get caught up in them now. And even though we have visions, even though we have dreams, even though we can see it and taste it and smell it, oftentimes we lose sight of what is our true why. And I think the way you just answer that is perhaps the most powerful way I've heard anybody answer that question in my 30 years of asking that question. So thank you for sharing that. I sincerely mean that.
So
Sincerely
thank
mean
you.
that, brother. So friends, Gresh, as you can tell, he's a deep individual. I've been following him on social media. My team has been watching some stuff. He's got a podcast. We're going to put a link to all of his different information. I'm going to challenge you to listen to his podcast. Follow him on social media. If you're in need of marketing, as so many business owners do, hey, y'all reach out to him. He can add some insight. You can tell that he's got some wisdom beyond years right here in his own life. And so, man, thanks so much for joining me today on the show, brother.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin.
Friends, I realize life is hard. It is. Life is good. Life is good. It's hard sometimes. Doesn't have to be. Hey, we're going to continue to make everything a little bit easier. Until next time, y'all got to do a favor for me. Y'all got to go out and make it. Make it a great day. It's not going to happen unless you make it. Friends, we'll see you next time.